On July 4th, 1946, Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, 24 years old, was executed at Biskupia Gorka Hill near the city of Gdansk, Poland. She was one of 11 defendants who received the highest sentence in the trial for war crimes committed at the Stutthof concentration camp. During the trial, Barkmann was accused of directly participating in acts of violence and repression, particularly related to the selection process for areas under stricter control. She had served as a supervisor in the women's section, SK3 of the Stutthof camp. Witnesses described her as a woman with striking appearance but brutal behavior. In the camp, she was referred to by prisoners as the beautiful ghost. Stutthof was the first concentration camp established by Nazi Germany outside its borders during World War II. It began operating on September 2nd, 1939, just one day after Germany invaded Poland. Initially set up as a civilian internment camp, it was later expanded and converted into an official concentration camp under the SS. In Germany, where Barkmann was born and raised, the Nazi regime had imposed a comprehensive propaganda system. School children were taught using state-approved textbooks, with content focused on loyalty to the supreme leader, ethnic division according to party ideology, and racial prejudice. Barkmann was born in 1922 in Hamburg and came of age in this environment. She began working at Stutthof in January 1944, when the camp was entering a phase of expansion, with more structured selection systems and facilities for handling prisoners. Within a short time, she became one of the most feared female supervisors among the inmates. By the time Jenny arrived at Stutthof, the camp was still undergoing expansion. It had become one of the largest detention facilities in northern Poland, where many sentences were carried out during the final phase of the war. In early September 1939, German forces launched their invasion of Poland using air power and armored units. This event is widely regarded as the beginning of World War II. The occupation advanced rapidly. The German military, equipped with modern weapons and employing blitzkrieg tactics, quickly took control of most of Polish territory. Within just a few weeks, millions of civilians found themselves under the authority of a newly imposed German administrative and military regime. The German government's policies in Poland extended far beyond military occupation. The deeper objective was to dismantle the cultural and social foundations of the country. Intellectuals, clergy, and influential community figures were arrested, according to pre-prepared lists. Those who survived initial purges were sent to labor camps, where living conditions were extremely harsh and resources were scarce. Several regions of Poland were also selected as centers for large-scale repressive measures targeting Jewish populations. Detention camps and special facilities were built across the occupied territories. Stutthof was among them. On September 2nd, 1939, the Stutthof camp was established in a remote area near the town of Stutthof, approximately 34 kilometers east of Danzig, now Gdansk. It was the first concentration camp constructed by the Germans outside the borders of the Reich. This marked the beginning of a broader expansion of the detention system beyond German territory. Initially, Stutthof operated as a civilian internment camp under the jurisdiction of the Danzig police. Its primary function was to detain individuals considered a threat to the new order. Most were non-Jewish Poles, including intellectuals, political figures, and those viewed as dissidents. By November 1941, the camp was reorganized and reclassified as a labor education facility under the control of German security forces. Despite the name, it effectively operated as a forced labor camp. Many detainees were made to work under conditions of severe food and medical shortages, leading to a sharp rise in mortality over a short period. This transition marked a turning point in the history of Stutthof as the camp began to take on the clear structure of an organized detention system. By January 1942, the camp was officially taken over by the Schutzstaffel SS and operated according to the standards of the Nazi concentration camp system. Stutthof expanded rapidly. From a temporary internment facility, it developed into a network of more than 100 subcamps, scattered throughout industrial zones and towns in the occupied territories. These subcamps functioned as links in the broader system of forced labor, supplying manpower for weapons production, construction projects, and resource extraction. In 1943, the camp entered a phase of increased operational capacity. New facilities were constructed, including large-scale prisoner processing areas. One particular section could accommodate around 150 individuals per intake and was designed to relieve overcrowding. Meanwhile, logistical infrastructure was also expanded to manage the rising number of deaths within the camp. All of these elements were integrated into a streamlined and systematic operation. By June 1944, Stutthof was added to the list of camps involved in the broader plan to process Jewish prisoners from various parts of Europe. Previously, the camp had primarily detained non-Jewish Poles. Over time, the number of Jewish detainees increased significantly, especially from segregated settlements in Poland and the Baltic region. Many of these individuals were forced into labor under extremely harsh conditions or did not survive the initial period after arrival. In less than 5 years, Stutthof evolved into a multifunctional system, encompassing detention, forced labor, and prisoner processing. According to post-war records, an estimated 100,000 people were imprisoned there, of whom up to 60% did not survive. As the war entered its final phase, the Soviet Red Army advanced toward the Baltic region. The evacuation of the camp took place in a state of chaos as German forces retreated. Some prisoners were forced to leave the camp during compulsory transfers in the middle of winter, resulting in significant loss of life. The camp staff, including Jenny Barkmann, left the camp during this period. In post-war records, this evacuation is often referred to as a death march, a term used to describe the harsh weather, severe deprivation, and high number of casualties over a short period of time. By the end of January 1945, the camp was completely abandoned before Soviet forces entered the area. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann was born on May 30th, 1922 in Hamburg into a working-class family. Her father was a dock worker, while her mother took care of the household. Jenny's childhood appeared outwardly quiet, but it unfolded during a time when Nazi ideology was quietly spreading throughout German society. According to acquaintances, Jenny once dreamed of becoming an actress or a model, a common aspiration for many young women of that era. However, the social climate of the 1930s Germany soon began to shape the course of her life. In January 1933, when Jenny had just turned 10, Adolf Hitler came to power. The new regime's propaganda machine, directed by Joseph Goebbels, quickly expanded. From newspapers and radio to cinema and public spaces, all media worked to construct the image of Hitler as an infallible leader. In schools, children were educated to show loyalty to the state and its leader. Ideas of racial hierarchy, extreme ideology, and militaristic values gradually became embedded in the curriculum. The Barkmann family was Protestant. Jenny grew up under the dual influence of traditional religious teachings and state propaganda. As she reached adulthood, Barkmann was heavily influenced by the wartime education and media system. In January 1944, at the age of 22, she was recruited to work at the Stutthof concentration camp, where she became a female overseer. By that time, she had already given birth to a child out of wedlock, who was being cared for by her mother back home. At Stutthof, Jenny underwent training for new female overseers. One of the instructors emphasized that prisoners were not to be regarded as equal individuals and had to be treated with strict discipline to maintain order. These ideas were repeated often during the training, and Jenny was reportedly quick to absorb and apply them. Within a short period of time, she was identified by many inmates as one of the strictest and most severe overseers in the SK3 women's subcamp. They referred to her with nicknames such as the Beautiful Ghost or Crazy Jenny. Several witnesses in post-war records stated that Barkmann had used physical punishment on prisoners. Some of these incidents were believed to have resulted in serious consequences, including bodily harm and, in some cases, death. A number of testimonies also alleged her involvement in selecting physically weak prisoners or women with small children for special processing lists during the final phase of the war. According to interrogation transcripts, Barkmann admitted to organizing prolonged roll calls during winter as a form of discipline and control. These roll calls often exposed prisoners to extreme cold, leading to severe hardship. Other statements reported that she engaged in violent behavior during routine activities, such as bathing or mealtime. One witness, identified as Sawika, testified that a friend of hers lost consciousness after such an incident and did not survive. Barkmann's name appeared in numerous post-war documents, described as one of the more coercive and violent female overseers at the Stutthof camp. Medical conditions at the Stutthof camp deteriorated severely by late 1944. An outbreak of typhus spread rapidly amid worsening sanitation and extreme malnutrition. The epidemic peaked in December, with the mortality rate reaching of deceased. Some medical reports noted that bodies had to be stored temporarily outside the main compound. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, the overseer of the SK3 women's subcamp, later testified during interrogation. Each day, between 15 and 40 women died. The bodies were placed outdoors, as there was no more capacity to handle them. These scenes were repeatedly mentioned in internal reports and post-war documentation. In early 1945, as Soviet forces approached, German authorities ordered the evacuation of the entire Stutthof camp system. Nearly 50,000 prisoners, mostly Jewish, were forced to leave under harsh winter conditions. Many did not survive due to hunger, exposure, and exhaustion during the prolonged marches. Some post-war accounts refer to mass killings near the Baltic Sea, where thousands of prisoners were transported under extreme weather. A portion of them perished after being pushed into the freezing waters. Other reports describe shootings that took place after the prisoners were gathered near the shoreline. The total death toll during the evacuation is estimated at over 25,000, roughly half of those forced to leave the camp. By late April 1945, a group of surviving prisoners was put on ships departing from the coast. However, according to some records, part of that group never reached its final destination. On May 9, 1945, Soviet forces reached and liberated the Stutthof concentration camp. However, they found only about 100 survivors, individuals who had hidden in abandoned sections of the camp. Most of the camp staff and SS overseers, including Jenny Barkmann, had already fled Stutthof in January 1945. As the course of the war turned decisively against Germany, Jenny went into hiding for several months, blending in with the stream of refugees. In May 1945, she was discovered and arrested by Polish militia forces at a train station in Danzig, now Gdansk. During the initial interrogations, Barkmann denied all accusations. She claimed to have treated Jewish prisoners well and even attempted to assist them. However, her statements were contradicted by a large number of documents and testimonies from survivors. In the records, Jenny was described as a violent overseer who abused prisoners and took part in the selection process that targeted women and children for high-risk groups. Her arrest marked a significant turning point, transforming her from a fugitive after the war into one of the first female SS overseers to be brought to trial in Poland. On April 25, 1946, the first Stutthof trial opened in Gdansk, Poland, to prosecute serious crimes against humanity committed at the Stutthof concentration camp. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, a former overseer at the SK3 women's subcamp, was one of the central defendants. Dozens of surviving witnesses were summoned to testify. They recounted acts of violence they had personally witnessed. Several described Barkmann's involvement in the selection of women and children for so-called special treatment areas. Others spoke of outdoor roll calls held in the dead of winter, during which many prisoners could not withstand the freezing temperatures. Throughout the proceedings, Jenny showed no signs of distress. Rather than displaying behavior appropriate to the gravity of the trial, she appeared more concerned with her appearance, frequently changing outfits and hairstyles, and at times interacting with prison guards in a manner some considered inappropriate for the courtroom setting. Her demeanor left many observers puzzled. Several of her female co-defendants behaved similarly, laughing during recesses and appearing unserious in the face of the charges against them. This led some onlookers to question their awareness of the full scope of their actions. Jenny's defense attorney argued that she had exhibited signs of mental instability and lacked control over her behavior during her time at the camp. However, the weight of evidence and survivor testimony undermined this claim. On May 31, 1946, the verdict was delivered. Jenny Barkmann, along with 10 other defendants, including 5 women, was found guilty of severe violations of international humanitarian law and sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed under the law at the time. Several of the women wept upon hearing the sentence. Jenny, just 24 years old, remained composed, her face expressionless, as the final judgment was read. When asked for her final words, Jenny did not plead for forgiveness, nor did she shed a tear. According to some press sources, she simply stated, "Life is indeed a pleasure, and pleasures are usually short-lived." The remark, brief yet chilling, was recorded and referenced for years afterward as an unforgettable detail. On July 4, 1946, Polish authorities carried out a public execution on Biskupia Gorka Hill in Gdansk for the defendants convicted in the Stutthof trial. It was one of the very few post-war events where capital punishment was performed publicly under government supervision. Contemporary reports estimated that around 200,000 people gathered in the area. Local authorities temporarily suspended work activities, organized public transportation, and deployed security forces to maintain order. The execution site was chosen for its elevated and open location, allowing the public to observe from a distance. At approximately 5 p.m., 11 trucks transported the condemned to the site under heavy guard. Jenny Barkmann was among them. The individuals tasked with carrying out the executions were selected from among former camp prisoners, intended as a symbolic act. A shortened execution method was employed, which resulted in a longer time to death compared to modern procedures. Some sources noted strong physical reactions from certain prisoners, requiring direct intervention from the execution team to complete the process. In at least one case, the equipment failed to function as intended and had to be operated manually. The crowd shouted slogans such as, "For our husbands, for our children." These emotional outbursts reflected the collective trauma carried through the war years. However, some behaviors, such as attempts to approach the bodies or collect souvenirs, sparked controversy in both the press and public discourse at the time. Independent reports noted that The on-site police presence did not clearly intervene, something some later historians interpreted as a reflection of a permitted silence in the collective post-war psychological state. Even so, the aftermath of this public event raised concerns. Several schools reported incidents of children reenacting the execution by hanging toys or mimicking behavior, prompting authorities to issue warnings. Unverified rumors also began to circulate, such as claims that Jenny's remains were repatriated to Germany and improperly handled. In reality, according to official records, the bodies of the executed were transferred to the Medical University of Gdansk for academic purposes. This execution remains one of the few post-war instances where capital punishment was carried out publicly. It served both as a legal penalty and as a form of collective emotional release after years of occupation and terror. Barkmann's death was part of the Polish government's broader effort to expose and prosecute war criminals, yet it also rekindled the persistent question of where justice ends and retribution or collective memory begins, especially when a society's moral compass has been strained by radical ideology. The death of Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, the woman once known as the beautiful ghost of Stutthof, closed a dark chapter in the history of World War II, but it could not erase the memory of what happened inside the camp, where humanity was pushed to its limits by barbed wire, ideological pressure, and unconditional obedience. Jenny was not the only one responsible, yet her cold expression, vacant eyes, and indifference to the verdict turned her into a symbol of silent cruelty, quiet but deeply rooted and absolute. History recorded her name. But what about society and us, the ones who came after? When brutality becomes normalized, when inhumane acts are justified with the words, just following orders, the question is no longer simply who was guilty, but rather, what allowed it to continue? Have we truly learned anything from Stutthof? Or are we repeating the same patterns in new forms, in places without fences or watchtowers, but still marked by control and silence? If you believe what happened at Stutthof deserves to be remembered, then telling these stories is not just recalling the past. It is a way of preserving awareness of what must never be forgotten. If you found this video helpful and want to learn more about history, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who may be interested. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content.